WTBQ.
Good afternoon, Tony Abbatine coming to you from Game On, live from New York, WTBQ FM and frozenropes.com on the World Wide Web. We have a special guest that probably will be joining us in the next 5 minutes or so from Orange County, California, on the other side of the coast. Industry expert Alan Jaeger. Those of you that follow professional baseball or even at the college level, Alan Jaeger and Jaeger Sports is really the authority on throwing, arm injury prevention. Alan is I'm going to call him, is the throwing guru in the industry. Today we're going to kind of keep him locked in on what's going on at the amateur level, how we can better prepare our Little League coaches, high school coaches, and college coaches in keeping kids healthy. And more important than just simply keeping players healthy, but getting them stronger. As we talked last week, John Taminia, the scouting supervisor for the Chicago White Sox, who was gracious enough to give us a good hour of his time, really the first thing that teams, tryouts, and coaches will evaluate your son or daughter who plays softball or baseball is throwing. Throwing really is the first part of the practice, the tryout. So to the extent that your son or daughter wants to play at the Little League, high school, or college level or beyond, the skill of first impression, as we call throwing, is so critically important. I know the older players, when they go to combines or tryouts or showcases, we're typically telling the young ladies and the boys that you better make sure that your throwing skills are good. You've got a good, healthy arm. Your arm action is sound, because if it doesn't look good, those coaches, those high school coaches, and even the college coaches, and certainly the pro scouts, won't even stay around long enough to see your other skills. So Alan will be joining us in the next few minutes. Just on some side notes, we're going to have a special guest in studio November 11th, I guess 2 Fridays from today. All-time favorite New York Met third baseman Howard Hojo Johnson will be in New York. We'll be spending time in studio talking about coaching your own child, certainly a theme that we can all relate to. Howard has his son Glenn, who is now playing professional baseball. Howard has had the privilege at times, he calls it, to have coached him, and Hojo's going to be talking about not only talking and coaching your own kid, but really identifying some of what he calls the 5 absolutes of hitting, whether you're working with a 9-year-old boy or girl at the college level, or certainly at the professional level like Hojo has been doing the last few years with the New York Mets. What are the 5 things that you need to know and teach in order to give your son or daughter a chance to have some fun on the baseball field? Next week, we'll also have, actually November 4th, Chris Trieste, the athletic director from Chester, will be kind enough to come on in, and we're going to go back and forth. And Chris and I have been debating and discussing physical education, what's going on in the phys ed classes in public schools. Is it time for a change? What could be tweaked? The epidemic issues of adolescent obesity, which continues to plague this country and beyond. We're going to talk about the whole coaching selection process in public schools, the good, the bad, the ugly component of that. So that'll be next week. Chris, again, is the athletic director at Chester High School, and he will be in studio joining us. Before we forget, we've got to mention our main man, Andrew Scott, and even Jason Richardson from AAU Baseball, because of the vision and the passion in which both of them put forward in playing. One of our big sponsors, in addition to ShopRite, your place, your time, all the time. Let's see if we can. I think we have Alan on the phone right now. If we can. Alan, this is Tony Abbatine from New York, WTBQ, and live at frozenropes.com. Good morning, afternoon.
Good morning and good afternoon. We'll cover them both.
Alan, I have to tell you, you're talking now. We're in Orange County. When people think of Orange County, they immediately think of Orange County, beautiful Southern California. I'm here to tell you today that Orange County, New York is alive and well, even though we have a nor'easter that is coming up the coast, and we will have snow tomorrow as you're out probably working out and sunbathing in 80-degree weather.
Would you believe I actually know what a nor'easter is? Because in 1992, I roomed with John Schiffner of the Chatham A's in Chatham, and I spent 10 weeks with him, and I found out things like what nor'easters mean. I also know what quahogs are.
That's pretty impressive. Alan, we were telling the audience somewhat about your background and Jaeger Sports, and those of you that are just tuning in now, we mentioned, and I'll say it, Alan is the industry expert in this area. The personal trainer and consultant to so many different professional players. His resume of people that he's worked with is so impressive it would take up the whole show. But those of you who know a little bit about professional baseball, Cy Young Award winner Barry Zito, All-Stars Dan Harron, and Andrew Bailey. Alan has also been doing and continues to do consulting work for hopefully the soon-to-be 2011 World Champion Texas Rangers. His work in college baseball from Cal State Fullerton to Vanderbilt, the list continues on and on. He is an author of probably one of the best books, in my opinion, on the mental part of the game, getting focused, staying focused, a Far Eastern approach to sports and life. Today, and Alan and I talked yesterday, the whole mental skills and really understanding the inside game, if you will, is a topic and a show in and of itself. I'm going to force Alan to stay locked in on what we mentioned before, the ultimate gift of a lifetime, you as an amateur coach, right, giving your child a chance to throw and throw properly. Alan, we must have gotten over a dozen questions already coming in, but before we get to the questions, arm injury, arm care, long toss, right, concepts that are so dear and passionate to your heart. Give our audience just an overview on what exactly you're doing, certainly at the major league level, but more importantly, how you're able to integrate it now into the amateur level.
Well, I guess the short of it is that long toss to me is something that's been around forever. The irony is that we had to reintroduce, quote unquote, a throwing program only because in response to a throwing program that was created in the early to mid 90s, which, as we've talked about, is really a glorified rehab program. So there's several reasons why the baseball community got so locked into this mentality of restricted throwing or conservative throwing. But the good news is that long toss is officially coming back, and now it's becoming part. It's part of the nomenclature. And the good thing is that everybody we've ever met with, we've actually met with 5 different organizations, or at least spoken with, consulted with, and the irony is that they're all long toss guys. I mean, for the most part, everybody loves long toss. Everybody agrees with long toss. Almost all the players or coaches or front office people we've met with did long toss, but something happened in the mid 90s between signing bonuses going up, multi-year contracts going up, and again the advent of this rehab mentality, which part of it came because of a study ASMI put out there. But the short answer is that we got into a world of hurt for probably 15 to 18 years that has now been grandfathered in. And the irony is that it's really affected mostly the professional players. The college and the amateur world, largely in part because they're with their players for 2, 3, 4 years. And I think they have a lot more flexibility with regard to what they do. It's interesting, but the college coaches we speak to now, the high school coaches, the travel ball teams, they're all about the long toss. They love the training side of it, the development side of it. In the professional world, ironically, which is considered to be, of course, the top tier, they're the ones, unfortunately, that got really stuck into this paradigm. But now they're coming out of it, and so yes, it's near and dear to my heart. Mainly because I've had so many players leave our program or leave a college program where they were doing our program or long tossing per se, and they went into professional baseball, and then for the most part, against their will, they were forced into a very, very restricted throwing program that not only did it cause them to lose a lot of velocity, but ultimately a lot of guys broke down and had careers ended because of it.
Alan, let's drill down and let's say, for example, a high school player. This was actually a question that came in. In distance, those that are not as familiar, long toss is a very subjective term. Long toss is certainly different for a 9-year-old than it certainly would be for a high school player. You've got a 16-year-old, good, healthy arm, and I know it's a tough question because you've got in-season, off-season injury factors. What would be the maximum distance you would recommend for that 16-year-old boy who has had an adequate foundation, has been throwing, right? They're not coming off of injury. They've been their bodies are in good shape. What is the distance for that 16-year-old?
Well, I'm going to go back to really our first statement about developing arms. Number one is we teach each player intimately how to listen to their own arm. And what I mean by that is that, as you know, Tony, everybody's different between size, DNA, what they've done the last 6 months, what they've done the last 6 years, what they've done the last 3 days. But I guess a general rule of thumb is that if a kid is a 6-foot pitcher that can throw 85 miles an hour without a lot of effort, it might take a week or 2 or 3, but he'll be able to push 250 to 300 feet. It doesn't mean for sure he'll get there because of mechanics or because of his history, but as a rule of thumb, a 90-mile-an-hour fastball at 35 degrees or so will go approximately 280 to 300 feet. And so I guess it wouldn't be so much to tell a high school player how far out he should expect to go. It would be to tell a high school player that if you throw 80, that you should pretty much be able to get to 200 to 250 feet, or at least start training toward that. And then, of course, that will then open you up to a new threshold where now you might go 250 to 280 and 280 to 300, and that's as simple as it gets at how arms start to develop. But I wouldn't want someone to think, okay, I have to throw at 300 feet or I have to throw at 250, or like some of our older guys, I have to throw at 380. I want them to think in terms of how far can I get out there progressively and safely, and that would be more of the goal, Tony. I guess to really work toward lengthening the arm out and finding out how much distance is in the arm.
Well, the Little League coaches that visit our locations around the country, and I have to make sure that our friends out in Glendora, California, and San Diego, 2 of our West Coast facilities where Alan will be doing some work, and most likely we'll be doing some clinics in the off season. You see I call it's the 60-foot mentality, Alan, because of the limitations of a ball field. You've got the opposing team on the other side, and these poor young players, their whole pregame warm-up and even the practice component to it, they're throwing 60 feet. And we implore the coaches at the youth level, not even getting into distance and talking about 35-degree angles out, just get out and throw. One of the components of that, get it to the point where that little 10 or 11-year-old can't reach mom or dad. What are your feelings on that?
Well, first of all, what you said, I can't agree with you more. With all the social media and all the gadgets out there in this day and age, forget about talking about long toss for a moment. Just get out there and throw. I mean, to me, the best arms that I have seen over my entire life, including my arm was pretty good, and it usually comes down to there's a common denominator. And the common denominator is the kids threw often. I don't mean threw on a mound every other day for 20 travel teams. I mean they just got out and threw. I threw BP every day to my buddies and vice versa. And I think that's the greatest element missing right now. It isn't even about that you have to throw it as far as you can every day. It's about what you said. You have to get outside. The arm, the more you use it properly, the more it's going to produce, especially like a language at 10 for 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road. And that's the greatest travesty for me as far as the development of arms, is that kids at a young age, they're either playing too many games or they're just not going out and playing enough.
Alan, along those lines, and the questions, and this is tougher for the amateur coaches. All right, they're out there throwing. What do you see from a throwing standpoint? I mean, we all know what a good arm action looks like. Some of the red flags in those throwing skills that we can share with the audience. John Tomini, the scouting supervisor, talked about the hook and the wrap and stride direction, stride angle differences and whatnot, and some deceleration angles. In layman's terms, you're out there with your travel team, or you're just out there with your son or daughter throwing. What are some of the things that you can look for and some possible solutions we can give to the coaches?
Well, the most basic ones I always look for is the head and the spine, and the base. So it's kind of like in yoga, you start from the ground up. So I'm a big base guy. I look at the direction, I look at the front side, and the head. The head to me is so telling because, as you know, once the eyes start getting off parallel from the ground quickly or the head pulls out, there's obviously going to be problems there with the arm either dragging, trailing, what have you. But the other big thing to me is the spine. A lot of times people try to fix arm slots, and it's not usually the arm slot. It's almost always going to be the spine. And so I like to notice right away is someone leaning back, in which usually contributes, of course, to the head pulling out or vice versa. So if we're talking at the youth level, the most simple things to look for that's going to expose a problem to me is their alignment with their feet, their spine angle, and their head. And if you can just start, and videotape is priceless. If you can videotape the kids so they can see what you're telling them, they can see how their head is pulling out badly, they can see how their spine is bending back, they can see how open their front side is when they throw or how closed they are when they throw. It's very, very powerful because visual learning, as you know, is a critical part of the development process, especially a young kid. And I'm a big drill guy. Once I see that there's a spine problem or a head problem or a feet problem, I have everybody do mirror drills. And if you know me, you'll be doing thousands of reps because I believe that at the end of the day, to really change your behavior, to really change a program, and I'm sure most people would agree with this, there's just no substitution for the drills.
Alan, how can we implore the next generation of coaches and young players? It's a big problem in the East Coast, and I hear it from all of the other training locations around the country. Teaching throwing before pitching. We have, and I'll look no further than New York. I'll leave the studio and we'll have 25 pitching lessons scheduled from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock tonight at our location in Orange County. And when we try to tell the parents, your 10, 11, 12-year-old, your 13-year-old doesn't need a pitching lesson, they need a throwing coach. We need to spend more time getting them to understand the way in which the hands break, how the glove, our classic teaching cue, the swim and swivel action, what exactly the back foot should be doing. John Tomini and I talked last week about the proverbial German Shepherd on the fire hydrant, which is our teaching term for the jumpers, versus the Pedro Martinez, I'm going to flip the shoelaces and get some good backside rotation. What suggestion could we make for the parents, the coaches, the high school coaches, right, to start teaching throwing and stop with my pitching rotation? They can throw 5 balls. We get this all the time. Tony, can you teach us the curveball, the split, and everything else? But you still can't, your pitching staff still can't manage and throw a fastball. And at 74 miles an hour for a high school senior, that's unacceptable. How do we get that message better across? Well, the message is simple. I would talk to any of these coaches, especially the parents, and say, and obviously the players, I say, look, how interested are you in finding out how healthy and strong and durable with great recovery period you want your arm? And at the end of the day, this is about development. I don't care. Look, you have to get on the mound. You have to work the mechanics. I get that. But at the end of the day, there's no substitution for the training and development of the arm. The reason why so many players in professional baseball in the last 15 years, and that doesn't exclude amateur baseball. I use professional baseball because it's an easier model because that's where this 120 program really took root. But the single greatest reason is because they started under-training, under-developing, and under-conditioning arms. So 120 feet is 40% of a 300-foot throw, meaning a 90-mile-an-hour fastball at 35 degrees will go 300 feet. So if you start under-training the arms, the first thing that's going to go is going to be the life in the arm, the endurance, the arm strength. So back to the question, if coaches don't start understanding that the priority is to first build the house correctly, build your foundation, build the health, strength, endurance,
resiliency of the arm. But a lot of coaches don't also understand. I did pitching lessons for 20 years. Do you know how many times I had a pitcher on a mound? Maybe 5. Now, I'm not talking about our pro camp where we had pitchers bullpen to get ready for spring training, but my Saturday, Sunday private one-to-one lessons that I did for probably 15 years, we rarely got on a mound, and one of the main reasons why is because the focus was first on the arm care program with the J-bands and all that stuff, but secondly, a lot of people don't realize the incredible benefits that long toss brings mechanically. For instance, our kids have to learn how to have a feel with the release point at 60 feet and 112 feet and 208 and 272 and 310. So they have to hit a guy in the chest at all these different increments. They have to learn what it feels like for the arm to gradually open up and stretch out. Then when you come into your throwing partner, they have to learn how to maintain this 300-foot throw per se or whatever it is back into 270 and 260 and 180 and 140. So the entire time they have this great mind-body awareness. They have to be very connected to their mechanics. They have to learn how to repeat. They have to have incredible intimacy with the release point. So I got so much benefit out of long tossing. And one side note I'll make, and then I'll kick it back to you, is this. People get on these mounds and do a lot of drills, which I understand can be helpful, but I found that long toss promotes the ideal mechanics, because when you hit a guy in the chest 5 times in a row from 300 feet, you're an athlete, number one. Number two, you have to have repeatability. Number three, your body has to organize itself in a way to where it's very in tune with repeating. And I have found unquestionably that our guys become very by the way, mechanically healthy as well, because you can't hit a guy in the chest at 300 feet 5 times in a row with your head pulling out and your front side pulling out and your arm dragging and God knows what else you could possibly do.
We got to make sure that people can find you, Alan, after the broadcast, jaegersports.com. We've got high school coaches from, looks like El Coronado, California, calling in for a great question, a very technical question. We're going to try to get to it after we really pound away on this whole the pitching drills and how we've got to make sure as coaches that we're not segmenting. I call it the mechanical mess that we've created, Alan, in this country. Video technology has been great. It's afforded player development at the major league level with such incredible information. The problem, and this is my opinion, we're starting to teach in a frame-by-frame world. The over-teaching of balance, this pausing at the height of your delivery, it continues to plague the overall rhythm and flow that you don't get when you allow and encourage pure throwing. Before we get into the J-bands, which to me, if our listening audience, if there's one thing that you're going to pick up and hopefully understand the importance of learning how to warm up before you throw, and how Alan's J-band program, from the major league players that use it to most of our locations around the country, it's become the gospel, both in arm injury prevention and in strengthening. Alan, I'm going to throw it back to you. Pitching drills, pro or con, good, bad. Give me some of the worst ones that you've seen, even in spring training. John and I talked last week about how there's some really bad information at the major league level.
Well, you know, I'm into athleticism at the end of the day. I really believe that pitchers are athletes. I'm all about certain drills. I think that repetition, muscle memory is great. But I agree with you. I think to a degree we've gotten way too caught up with overcoaching mechanics, and it's kind of like it's like a cookie cutter system where you're trying to get everybody to do similar things. And I think at the end of the day, we all know every athlete's different, number one, so we have to have flexibility. But number two, I know it's going to sound like a broken record, but I feel like that you find your mechanics through long toss. When you, as an example, the earlier example about hitting a guy in the chest at 300 feet, how about hitting him in the chest at 350 feet? We have a kid that does our clinics named China McCarney, who's actually on our YouTube video, and we've been doing clinics lately and having him come out, and it's eerie to see a guy at 350 pretty much inside the body 90% of the time, you know, more or less. And So I feel like between balance and head being still and centrifugal force and explosion, there's so much value to that. Secondly, the other part of long toss that a lot of people don't get is when you take a 350-foot thrower, let's use a more normal idea of 300 feet. When you eventually we come in about 10 feet of throw back to 60 feet. When you're at 60 feet, Tony, and you're making a 300-foot throw, which was your furthest throw that day, and you're not decelerating 1 foot, so you're still, your intention behind the throw, your force is still 300 feet, and you can hit your partner at shin high or lower, especially on the glove side. To me, you're promoting the most ideal mechanics a pitcher can have. And what I mean by that is that to make a 300-foot throw at 60 feet and hit your partner shin high or lower, you have to have incredible balance. Your head has to be in a great spot. You have to have incredible downhill plane, and there's no way you're going to get your release point out in front and get to that downhill plane unless your mechanics are perfect, and whatever perfect means for each person. But in other words, you can't have flaws in your mechanics to pull this off. And so I'm going to go back to using long toss to help promote ideal mechanics. I'm a drill guy. If I see a guy that's head's pulling out or front side's pulling out, I will do repetition. But the one thing I don't like to do is I don't like to talk to them on the mound too much, except for very subtle reminders, because I still want them to be more about where's your focal point and are you attacking. So we're going to kind of bridge at some point into mental stuff, but I'm a huge mental game guy, as you know, and to me at the end of the day is if you can take a 300-foot throw into 60 feet and hit your guy in the right ankle 9 out of 10 times, then you have repeatability, 2, you have great intention, and 3, your mechanics are solid. So if you're on the mound working with me, I know that stuff's in place. It's more about where's your focal point and did you commit to your focal point. So that's really how I start to teach mechanics. Maybe that applies to the older generation, the older guys, high school and up. But I don't feel like talking to a guy on a mound over and over again. It has its place, but I think it can be. We can obviously overcoach at that point.
Well, and I think that's exactly what you're seeing at the younger amateur market, Alan. You're seeing throwing and pitching being taught on the hill, and great advice. Let the young man who's on the pitcher now pitch, and we still struggle, and we still watch some of the pitching instruction done even at the high school, college level, where you've got the well-intended coach just having a full, and it's more of a monologue than a dialogue on the mound, and trying not only to break down the pitching delivery, but actually thinking that you're going to change arm action, arm slot, and all of the core components of throwing while the pitching is going on. And I think the best advice that we can give the young coaches, and I define young under 87, you know what, get off the mound and get your guys out there. And obviously it's not going to be 350 feet for that little leaguer out there, but point well taken. Take that little 12-year-old who's got a good arm, and can he hit the target and be consistent with hitting that target at let's say 110 feet or whatever the number is, right? You'll be surprised how much better that delivery is going to be once he's back into that 46 foot. I want to segue, if we can, into the J-bands.
Yes.
We've seen living proof, our locations from crossover symmetry to the Job exercises. It's been about 4 or 5 months now, and we've seen some incredible results. We've seen great results on the softball end, and I know you and I have to talk about that at some other point. We're seeing girls whose external rotation was just piss poor, if you will. They're throwing better. Their flexibility is better. Their ability to throw 3 days later, right, which they've never been doing before. I'm talking about overhand throwing. If you can, talk to us about the J-bands and how, whether you're 10 or the big leaguers that you work with, how that has become really the starting block in everything that you do for throwing and pitching.
Well, the J-bands, to me, I use words like magical for them. The feedback we get from them are quite honestly scary, astonishing. It almost doesn't make sense, but it does when you break it down. In a nutshell, this is what players do after surgery to rehabilitate their arm to where they feel better than they did before surgery. And so we just simply call it prehab versus rehab. our bands are designed to be on the field prior to throwing. In other words, our kids never touch a baseball until they do their band work. We actually do some arm circles to get some blood flow and heat, and then we'll get into the band work. But the beauty of the band work is that it's able to get to parts of the shoulder and parts of the surrounding muscle groups that you really can't do very well physically. You can physically try to stretch your arm all day long, but the band exercises, which are basically an extension of the Job exercises, they are able to isolate the areas that are, again, the small muscles that are tough to get to. A lot of it, as you mentioned, with external rotation, there's so many exercises you can do for external rotation where most people don't realize it, but they're walking around with a lot of imbalance in their shoulder. They're very strong on the front. They're very weak on the back. They have great internal rotation. They have poor external rotation. So, number one, just to get the shoulder area healthy, durable, strong, well-balanced is number one. But number two, the kicker is this. When you do a great arm care program before you go out and throw, it is going to optimize your distance. It's going to optimize the ease behind the arm working. It's safer. And then as you begin to do more and more band work, your throws are longer in endurance. And then the further out your arm learns to extend, well, that's going to create what's called arm speed or velocity. So it's this win-win-win-win-win. And then the last benefit, which is, to me, the key to keeping the arm healthy in the long term, is recovery period. So in other words, because you're on a banding program, which promotes a better endurance and long toss program, well, now you're going to have tremendous recovery period. We have guys, it doesn't make sense, but they'll throw 90 pitches in a game. If they feel anything in their arm, it's a very subtle, good soreness, but for the most part, they're able to go out and train the next day and start recycling the arm for their next start. In the old days, guys would be looking for their arm on the dugout floor. I mean, they're just toast usually, and so it's not a selling point anymore. Fortunately, we have a lot of bands out there, people like yourself, who once you just see the results after literally a few days, the feedback for us is instantaneous. The first workout we do with a player, it's unbelievable how much they can relate to how their arm would have felt without the band work and then after. So for anybody out there, all I would say is that whether it's our bands or any kind of TheraBand, do an arm care program. It's only 10, 12 minutes before you go out and throw. Don't even think about it otherwise, because you're just asking for A, your arm to be more vulnerable to maybe getting hurt that day, and B, you're not tapping into the development, the upside of your arm.
Alan, it's interesting. I just took a blog from someone in Arizona. Wow, sounds great, but this band program, Tony, probably cost about $400 or $500. To our listener in Arizona, good news. You don't have to break the bank. I don't know the exact retail number, but I know it's under $50, Alan, that the same program I know that all of our training centers are using and that you're using. If you were to go to jaegersports.com, not only will you be able to learn and find out a little bit more about it, you'll see all the big leaguers and major league teams that have used it. You'll also see Alan's 11 components of the J-Band training program, and for what really amounts to probably the dollar amount of a pitching lesson, every parent who has a young arm at home and who cares about it both from a preventive side and overall strengthening needs to go out and take a look at something like this. Alan, let's take a look at some of these are kind of the quick topics. Weighted balls, yes or no, for my 14-year-old son?
Wow. You got a couple hours? Number one, I always punt that question because if someone is monitored very well, Ron Wolforth, he's a very, very good friend of mine. He's big into under and overload training. If you're around someone that's an expert and they're monitoring you and they're educating you, I think there can be a very big benefit. You know, Trevor Bauer is one of our kids who also is a huge Ron Wolforth guy, and I trust Trevor's opinion like I trust Zito's opinion. He's a very intelligent guy, and I know from Ron he has had just significant success for a long period of time. He's also long toss has also become a major part of his training program at the ranch. But the short answer is that you better be monitored by someone that knows what they're doing. I would never go from 5 1/4 ounces to 9 ounces. You better do increments of very small amounts. And at the end of the day, for younger kids, you just have to be very careful because the shoulder muscles are very, even though they're pliable at a young age, they're not made to throw really heavy objects. So maintenance, just make sure you're with somebody that knows what they're doing and that is actually guiding you through the process if you do it.
One more topic before we head to another break. Curveball, sliders, splitters. At what age does that young phenom, in your opinion, Alan, need to start integrating those pitches?
Sliders and splitters, to me, are at the end of your career if you are about to get released out of professional baseball, or if you need to get into professional baseball. My concern with sliders and splitters is they're the two, in my opinion, they're the two main pitches that break the arm down the most. They both scare me, to be honest with you. I'm a big cutter guy, and I know with your relationship with Mariano, that's music to your ears, but I'm a huge cutter guy. But I'm a big believer in A, arm strength, fastball location, B, changeup. C, curveball is fine, but I'm an old school guy, meaning old school might be 30 years ago, not 10 years ago, in that until you're shaving, I personally would not, my kid would not throw a curveball until he was, I'd say, 14 or 15. Maybe play with it a little bit when he's 13, but I want him to throw 98 with an unbelievable changeup and be able to locate both. And I'll take my chances with him spinning the ball down the road because I don't want anything getting in the way of the development and the upside of building his arm properly.
We're spending an hour of baseball with throwing guru Alan Jaeger. This is Tony Abbatine. We are still live with Alan Jaeger. Alan, we're going to head right back into some, I think, hot topics anyway. Ice versus no ice. And I'll preface that question. You go to every Little League and high school travel game, little Johnny throws 49 pitches, it's 80 degrees, and 2 minutes after he throws, there's mom running over to put ice on the inner elbow and parts of the shoulder. Your opinion on ice for healthy arms?
Wow, you found my two topics I love to punt, the weighted balls and icing. By the way, the weighted ball question, I'm not going to say yay or I'm just going to say, look, talk to other experts about it. I'm not, that's not my expertise. Icing, I iced, I loved it. I know a lot of players love to ice. I know theories have come out in the last 5 years or so about slowing down the recovery period time or not being as efficient. So at the end of the day, if it feels good, do it. I personally like to ice. If I twisted my ankle playing basketball, the first thing I'm going to do when I go home is I'm going to ice my ankle, and I feel clearly it's going to make a difference. Now, someone could scientifically prove me wrong, but at the end of the day, if it feels good, do it. The irony of that question, and this is how I always answer it, is this. Our guys get into such ridiculous shape, conditioning-wise, that they rarely have the kind of swelling or soreness that they would ever need to ice. So to a degree, the new science supports kind of where we're at in that we don't need to ice. Our guys just don't need to ice because they just don't have that kind of swelling anymore. So that's the ultimate answer. But if you're not very well conditioned or you're not on a very good throwing program and you're really sore after throwing 50 pitches for the first time, I wouldn't tell you not to ice, but somebody else might tell you not to ice.
Which might explain why you see ice so prevalent at the amateur level, because from a total athleticism standpoint, from an overall strength standpoint, the typical 9 to 14-year-old has major core inefficiencies. They're just not strong enough. I guess at the end of the day, if little Johnny comes home and says that he's sore, I think it makes sense. The position we've taken is that if he feels great after coming off the field, leave the ice off. But yes, your point is well taken. If the ankle is twisted and there's some degree of soreness or discomfort, ice certainly does make sense. And we certainly hate to beat up the weighted ball program. I know I'm inundated with that question all the time, Alan. I'll just give you a very quick perspective.
Sure.
We've been blessed to be able to have Mariano Rivera for the last 15 years as our pitching partner, if you will, and the amount of information that we've learned from him at the end of the day, and people ask me all the time, what's the magic of Mo? I'll tell you what it really starts with. His flexibility is off the charts. You look at what he can still do, and I mean, he was doing splits and having flexibility off the charts, both shoulders, elbows, and lower body, even at a very early age. Mariano has always been someone that's used the weighted ball program, but he uses it very differently. If you watch him, and you'll see our orange frozen ropes weighted 14-ounce ball in the bullpen. He picks it up after he does his arm circles and his variation of the Job exercises, and he'll toss it around. He'll play with it just a little bit. He'll toss it every once in a while. Where we've had some success with the weighted balls, and certainly let's define weighted balls. If we're working with a high school pitcher, we're going to take the 5.5 ounce, which is the typical weight of a baseball. We'll maybe go to 7-8 ounces, where I think some of the coaches can benefit from it. It teaches awareness, right?
Sure.
You giving that extra 2 or 3 ounces, that young pitcher who might have issues in where they're breaking, right? Are they coming out clean? Are their hand positions too far away from what we call the zipper? Are they taking the ball straight behind them? If you have clean arm action, and God only knows what that is in talking to scouts, the heavier weight will not affect your ability to throw. And the nice thing, the ultimate feedback, if for some reason that young pitcher, right, the timing of the throw is off, or you've got a depressed elbow just at the point of delivery, or his finger position is not behind the ball, that's when they're going to feel the extra weight. So I think you're right. Having someone who knows what they're doing, err on the side of being conservative. I think the problem we're seeing now is that you go online and mom or dad or any Yahoo travel coach, and there's plenty of them out there, and there's also some great travel coaches out there. Let's buy a 9, a 10, and a 12-ounce ball, hand them out like candy, and hope and pray that we're not blowing out shoulders. So I think we've beaten up that topic enough.
Well, Tony, one other thing I'll add briefly is this. The other danger is that they start using these gadgets as a substitution for what I consider to be the holy grail as far as arm training, arm conditioning, arm health, arm strength, which is long toss. So at the end of the day, there's no substitution for getting on the field and starting to learn how to extend your arm out, build distance, build endurance, and then build explosion through that distance. And I've told a lot of people ask me about, well, what's the key to building arm strength? And I said, well, bands and long tosses 1 and 2, and it's going to be really far down the road to get to number 3. And that's not to diminish the value of core work. And there's so many great things out there: nutrition, sleeping well. The mental game is probably the king ultimately to your career. But as far as strictly the arm, bands and long toss to me, and you can say, well, what about mechanics? Well, you've already heard that mechanics to me really come out of long toss. If you want to put mechanics somewhere in there too, that's fine. But bands and long toss is A and B. You have a long way to go to find C. So get that through your mind, number one, if your concern or interest is to develop and optimize a player's arm. So
let's make the formula real simple. Alan, we just gave you a 12-year-old son. Congratulations. All right. Map out the strategy for that 12-year-old from the time in which he's starting to play till he's 15 years old. What allocation of time should be spent on bands, on the long toss, and which is a great segue into strength training. That's the big hot topic now. What is appropriate? And let's stay with your surrogate son of 11. What should that 11-year-old boy be doing, not only to just get stronger as it relates to arm strength and pitching, but just overall athleticism?
Well, first I'm going to do, because I'm going to eventually get to the bands and the long toss, but I'm going to talk about the other parts. So the first thing I'm going to do, well, first of all, he's going to have a breathing or some kind of a mental training exercise every day, number one. Number two is he's going to do yoga, or he's going to do something involving core. There's a guy out here, Marcus Elliott, he's a friend of mine, who just took over Seattle's entire organization with regard to this kind of training where it's kind of the cutting edge stuff that's coming out now, sports-specific stuff in baseball. So I want to get to those kind of guys for the body. So that and yoga for the body. 3, from simply the arm training point of view, he's going to be a band animal. He's going to do a lot of J-bands. He's going to kill those things pretty much every day unless he needs a day off. And this, it's all in perspective. So at first, he might only do bands 3 days a week and throw 3 days a week. But once he gets into what we call a positive cycle, where his arm is in great shape, and we're not talking about in-season yet because of bullpens and games and recovery period, but just simply in a training mode, he's going to be throwing, I'm just going to say 4 to 5 days a week, a lot of distance, a lot of endurance, and he'll pull down aggressively 3 or 4 of those days. And our number one principle, again, is listen to the arm. If he needs a day off, take a day off. If he wants to go light one day, go light. But to answer your question, he'll probably be throwing 5, maybe even 6 days a week. To the degree and the intent may change. We're going to keep him off the mound for the first 6 weeks of this training. Every cycle, every time we build up to prepare for a season, he'll always have at least 6 weeks where there's no bullpens, there's nothing to get in the way of the optimal way to build his base and develop the arm.
Alan, can you overload on the J-bands, in your opinion?
It's funny because I actually bring this up a lot of times when we're doing band work. And I actually have this comment. I don't know if you can do enough band work. A physical therapist might say you could, but relative to the amount of work the average kid out there is doing, I'd say it'd be hard to do too much, but I guess like anything in life, you can do too much of it. But it's so low impact. It's so much about... plus, you have things that start to happen. For instance, your arm starts to burn, and you start noticing that, okay, like anything in life, I'm kind of done. But I'd say the short answer is it's very hard to do too much of the band work.
Right. Let's segue into softball throwing. I don't know how much work you've done with softball throwing at most of our locations. I know we've been blessed to have Jessica Mendoza, Team USA superstar, and you talk about the ultimate role model for young ladies, former president of the Women's Sports Foundation. We've spent hours upon hours talking about throwing and how it's almost an epidemic, not so much an injury, although you get to the college level now and you've got girls now that are losing eligibility and can't even play by their sophomore year because of all kinds of rotator cuff and bicep tendonitis issues and whatnot. I know last year I spoke at the NFCA convention, which is the big softball party, and it was an hour of just teaching pure throwing skills. As you're certainly aware, the young ladies right from the beginning have a major handicap for some silly reason. We give them this 9-ounce watermelon, right, that they can't handle. Their smaller hands can't grab and throw it the right way, and at a very early age, they develop bad throwing habits. We've had more success in having softball girls throw baseballs. Talk to girls on the Team USA softball team, the Natasha Watleys of the world, Lisa Fernandez out on your part of the country, and they all talk about when they were young, they were playing Little League, they were playing baseball. Their dads were out with them having a catch with what we call the baby ball, and once their hands and arms were strong enough, that's when the big yellow watermelon came in. But we've had such great success just recently using the J-bands and starting to lengthen out the distance with the girls, because if you think it's archaic on the baseball, go watch a high school or even a college softball game, let alone their practice. These girls are throwing no more than, generally speaking, 60 or 70 feet away.
Yeah, and I actually was at Cal State Northridge not too long ago, and that was my experience. And, it's funny, but we get more people from the softball community tell us that, man, you got to get in the softball world. The parents are crazy. The kids, the travel teams, they say if you think baseball is hardcore, maybe because their timeline is so short, it's either college softball, hopefully maybe something like Team USA, but other than that, their shelf life is so short. And that's all I've heard, by the way, is the same thing as about the the neglect of the throwing. They just don't take throwing that seriously. And I love, by the way, I think your idea should be something that you should start talking to more and more softball coaches about. My sister was a great athlete. She grew up throwing a baseball and hitting a baseball, and I'm telling you, her throwing and hitting mechanics are scary. And I mean, you wouldn't know the difference between her and a guy per se. And I think there's something to that, so don't forget that point. I love your idea of having girls at a young age who are softball players throw a baseball. I think it makes a lot of sense. But your main point is yes. The softball community, they could gain quite a bit from being aware of band work and distance throwing.
Well, you know what, Alan? Together, that'll be our next joint project. We got about 50 seconds left here, and Jaegersports.com. Alan will be back, and we probably had another hour just to talk about throwing and arm care. We didn't even get into the fun stuff. Alan's book on getting focused, staying focused, a far eastern approach to sports and life. I can tell you, and I cannot say this without more conviction, what's missing with some of the older players is the mental skills training, really understanding the power of the diaphragm breath, what is visualization, imagery, all these things that Alan will be talking about. We'll have you back in a few weeks, Alan. We enjoyed having you, and stay tuned next week when Chris Trieste from Chester Athletic Department will be here. We'll see Hojo the following week, and we'll see Alan Jaeger sometime down the line.